Betrayed husband plots revenge with lemon pie. At family dinner, the dessert sparks an unbelievable reaction. Hello, welcome, leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy the story. What would you do if the person you trusted the most betrayed you in the most unimaginable way? For Henry, a man whose life revolved around his love for family and his passion for cooking, the answer wasn't easy. One night, a simple mistake led him to discover a devastating secret. A secret that shattered his world and left him questioning everything he knew. But instead of confronting the truth, Henry chose a path no one would expect. A silent, calculated plan involving the very thing that once brought his family together, a lemon pie. As the family gathers for a seemingly ordinary dinner, tension hangs in the air. But what starts as a typical family gathering quickly spirals into something far more sinister. With every bite, the sweetness of the dessert masks a bitterness that no one is prepared for. The night will end with a shocking revelation that will leave everyone at the table questioning the true meaning of trust, love, and betrayal. Are you ready to witness a story where every slice of pie comes with a hidden truth? This is not just a tale of revenge. It's a chilling exploration of the human heart, where the lines between love and hate blur, and where the final act is something no one will see coming. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the well-manicured lawns of Oakville, a picturesque small town nestled in the heart of upstate New York. Chef Henry Callahan, a local culinary legend, trudged up the driveway of his Victorian-style home, his shoulders heavy with the weight of a grueling day at his renowned restaurant, the Copper Pot. As he stepped through the front door, the silence that greeted him was deafening. Rachel, his wife of 23 years, was nowhere to be seen. Henry called out her name, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. No response. A knot formed in his stomach as he made his way to their bedroom, hoping to find a note explaining her absence. Instead, his eyes fell upon Rachel's old flip phone, lying forgotten in an open drawer. Henry hadn't seen that phone in years. Rachel had upgraded to a smartphone long ago. As he picked it up, intending to place it back in the drawer, a sudden vibration startled him. The screen lit up, revealing a new text message. Time seemed to stand still as Henry's eyes scanned the words that would forever change his life. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. Love, Tom. The phone slipped from Henry's trembling hands, clattering to the hardwood floor. His mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation. Any explanation that could make sense of those 7 words. But deep down, he knew. The truth was as clear as the summer sky outside, and just as vast and empty. Memories flooded his consciousness, stolen glances, hushed phone conversations, unexplained absences. All the little oddities he'd dismissed over the past few months suddenly aligned like a cruel constellation, spelling out a truth he'd been too blind or too trusting to see. Henry stumbled to the kitchen, his sanctuary, the place where he'd always found solace. The familiar sense of spices and herbs usually brought him comfort, but now they seemed to mock him, reminding him of all the meals he'd lovingly prepared for Rachel over the years. With shaking hands, he reached for the ingredients to make a lemon meringue pie, Rachel's favorite dessert. As he methodically zested lemons, his mind drifted to their first date, when he'd nervously presented her with a homemade lemon tart. She'd taken one bite and declared it the best thing she'd ever tasted. That moment had sealed their fate, or so he'd thought. Tears streamed down Henry's face as he whisked egg whites into stiff peaks, the repetitive motion providing a momentary distraction from the turmoil in his heart. Each ingredient he added to the mixing bowl felt like a piece of his shattered world: tart lemon juice for the bitterness of betrayal, sugar for the sweetness of memories now tainted, and cornstarch to thicken the filling, just as the lump in his throat grew with each passing moment. As he rolled out the pie crust, Henry's grief gave way to anger. How could Rachel do this to him? To them? 23 years of marriage, of building a life together, of supporting each other's dreams. All of it felt like a lie now. The rolling pin came down with increasing force, flattening the dough as if he could somehow flatten the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. Henry's mind raced with questions. Who was Tom? How long had this been going on? Had their entire marriage been a sham? The what-ifs and should-have swirled in his head like the meringue he was now beating to glossy perfection. As he slid the pie into the oven, a plan began to form in Henry's mind. The annual Callahan family reunion was scheduled for this Sunday. It was always a big affair, with relatives coming from all over the state to gather at Henry and Rachel's home. What better stage to expose Rachel's betrayal? The timer dinged, and Henry removed the golden brown pie from the oven. Its perfectly browned peaks and the citrusy aroma that filled the kitchen were a stark contrast to the bitterness that now consumed him. He set the pie on the windowsill to cool, staring out at the setting sun that painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. How many sunsets had he and Rachel watched together from this very spot? How many of those moments had been real? As darkness fell over Oakville, Henry made his decision. He would wait until Sunday. He would play the part of the loving husband, the gracious host, right up until dessert. And then, with everyone gathered around the table, he would serve up a slice of truth along with the lemon meringue pie. The sudden sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped Henry out of his reverie. Rachel was home. He quickly wiped away his tears and schooled his features into a mask of normalcy. As he heard her key in the lock, Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of a lifetime. "Honey, I'm home." Rachel's cheerful voice rang out. "Something smells amazing. Did you bake?" Henry plastered on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome home, dear," he called back, his voice steadier than he felt. "I made your favorite lemon meringue pie." As Rachel's footsteps approached the kitchen, Henry's resolve hardened. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. He would have his moment, his chance to expose the lie that had become his life. And when he did, he would make sure that this betrayal left a taste in everyone's mouth far more bitter than any lemon could ever be. The days leading up to the family reunion crawled by with excruciating slowness for Henry. Each moment felt like an eternity as he maintained the facade of normalcy, all while the knowledge of Rachel's betrayal ate away at him like acid. In the sanctuary of his restaurant kitchen, Henry found temporary respite from the turmoil at home. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of pans, and the orchestrated chaos of the dinner rush provided a welcome distraction. But even here, in the place he'd always felt most at peace, memories of Rachel haunted him. As he expertly filleted a salmon, his mind wandered to their first anniversary. He'd surprised Rachel with a gourmet meal, the centerpiece being a cedar-planked salmon that had taken him days to perfect. The look of pure joy on her face as she'd taken that first bite, was that real, or just another performance in their shared illusion? "Chef, the sauce is burning." The voice of his sous chef, Maria, snapped Henry back to reality. He quickly removed the pan from the heat, salvaging the sauce but burning his hand in the process. The physical pain was almost a relief, a tangible sensation to focus on instead of the emotional anguish that threatened to consume him. After the dinner service, Henry found himself alone in the kitchen, staring at the burn on his hand. The angry red mark seemed to mock him, a physical manifestation of the searing pain in his heart. With a heavy sigh, he began to gather ingredients for the reunion's fateful dessert. Each component of the lemon meringue pie now held a deeper, darker meaning for Henry. The lemons, usually a symbol of brightness and zest, now represented the sourness that had invaded his life. As he carefully zested the fruit, he couldn't help but think of how Rachel had slowly stripped away the sweetness of their marriage, leaving only a bitter rind. The sugar, once a representation of the sweetness they shared, now felt like a cloying mask, hiding the rotten core of their relationship. Henry measured it carefully, knowing that the perfect balance of sweet and tart was crucial, just as he had always strived for balance in their marriage, only to discover it had all been one-sided. As he separated eggs for the meringue, Henry's mind drifted to lazy Sunday mornings spent making breakfast together. Rachel's laughter as she playfully flicked flour at him, the warmth of her body as she leaned against him while he flipped pancakes. Were those moments real, or had she been thinking of Tom even then? The egg whites began to form stiff peaks under Henry's expert touch. He watched as the glossy white mixture took shape, thinking of how he and Rachel had built their life together from nothing. Just like this meringue, their relationship had seemed strong and beautiful on the surface, but it was fragile, ready to collapse at the slightest misstep. As he rolled out the crust, Henry's movements became more aggressive. Each push of the rolling pin was fueled by the anger and hurt that had been building since that fateful afternoon. The dough thinned under his forceful strokes, threatening to tear, much like the fabric of his marriage had been stretched to its breaking point. Henry carefully transferred the crust to the pie dish, his fingers working methodically to crimp the edges. How many times had he and Rachel stood side by side in their home kitchen, working together to prepare meals for friends and family? The muscle memory remained, but the joy that once accompanied it had vanished. As he poured the lemon filling into the crust, Henry's resolve strengthened. This pie would be his masterpiece, not of culinary skill, but of retribution. Each slice would be a revelation, exposing the truth that had been hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. The oven timer chimed, startling Henry out of his dark reverie. He carefully slid the pie onto the center rack, setting the timer for the perfect bake. As the sweet tart aroma began to fill the kitchen, Henry leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was he really prepared to destroy everything they'd built together? To air their dirty laundry in front of the entire family? But then he remembered the text message, the casual love, Tom, that had shattered his world, and his determination returned tenfold. As he cleaned up the kitchen, wiping down surfaces with perhaps more force than necessary, Henry's mind wandered to the upcoming reunion. He imagined the shocked faces of their relatives, the hushed whispers that would follow his revelation. Part of him felt a twinge of guilt for what he was about to do, but a larger part, the part wounded by Rachel's betrayal, relished the idea of finally unveiling the truth. The timer buzzed again, and Henry retrieved the pie from the oven. It was perfect, golden brown meringue peaks concealing the tart lemon filling beneath. As he set it on the windowsill to cool, he couldn't help but see it as a metaphor for his marriage, a beautiful exterior hiding a sharp, bitter truth. Henry stood there for a long moment, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about all the sunsets he and Rachel had shared over the years, all the dreams they discussed as twilight fell. How many of those moments had been genuine? How long had she been living a double life? As darkness settled over Oakville, Henry made his way home, the weight of his knowledge and his plans for Sunday heavy on his shoulders. He steeled himself for another evening of pretending, of smiling and nodding as Rachel chatted about her day, all while the truth burned inside him like a wildfire. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. Henry was ready to serve up the bitter truth, and he would make sure everyone got their fill. Sunday arrived with an unseasonably warm breeze that carried the scent of blooming magnolias through the open windows of the Callahan home. Henry had been up since dawn, meticulously preparing for the family reunion that would soon turn into a stage for his carefully orchestrated revelation. The dining room table, usually reserved for intimate family dinners, had been extended to accommodate the influx of relatives. Henry carefully arranged the place settings, each fork and knife aligned with military precision. The crisp white tablecloth seemed to mock him with its purity, a stark contrast to the deception that had tainted his marriage. As he placed the centerpiece, a vibrant arrangement of sunflowers that Rachel had picked up from the local farmer's market yesterday, Henry's hand trembled slightly. For a moment, he saw a flash of the woman he fell in love with all those years ago, her eyes sparkling as she presented him with the cheerful bouquet. He quickly shook off the memory, steeling his resolve. Today was not about nostalgia. It was about truth. The doorbell chimed at precisely 2 p.m., signaling the arrival of the first guests. Henry plastered on his best host smile, an expression he'd perfected over years of managing his restaurant. Rachel appeared beside him, her hand instinctively finding its way to the small of his back, a gesture that once brought comfort but now felt like a brand of betrayal. "Ready, honey?" Rachel asked, her voice warm and unsuspecting. Henry nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Together, They opened the door to welcome the flood of Callahan relatives. Aunt Mildred bustled in first, her ample frame swathed in a floral muumuu, bringing with her the scent of lavender and mothballs. "Henry, darling. Rachel, sweetheart," she exclaimed, pulling them both into a bone-crushing hug. "Something smells divine. Have you been cooking all day?" Henry managed a tight smile. "Just a few family favorites, Aunt Mildred. You know how it is." As more relatives poured in, cousins with rambunctious children, uncles arguing about the latest political scandal, Rachel's parents beaming with pride at their daughter's picture-perfect life, Henry felt a growing disconnect. These people, his family, had no idea of the turmoil bubbling beneath the surface of his carefully maintained facade. The living room quickly filled with the cacophony of family reunion chatter. Uncle Bob regaled anyone who would listen with tales of his latest fishing expedition. Cousin Sarah, 7 months pregnant, fielded endless questions about her baby registry and nursery plans. In the corner, a heated debate about the local high school football team's chances this season was brewing between Henry's brother, Mike, and Rachel's cousin, Tim. Through it all, Henry moved like a ghost, refilling drinks, accepting compliments on the appetizers, and deflecting questions about when he and Rachel might finally start a family of their own. Each interaction felt like a surreal dance, his body going through the motions while his mind remained fixated on the moment of truth that drew ever closer. Rachel, on the other hand, was in her element. She flitted from group to group, her laughter ringing out above the din, her touch lingering on Henry's arm or shoulder whenever they passed each other. To an outside observer, they were the perfect hosts, the epitome of a happily married couple. As the afternoon wore on, Henry retreated to the kitchen under the guise of checking on dinner. In reality, he needed a moment to collect himself. The weight of his knowledge, the burden of his planned revelation, felt heavier with each passing minute. He braced himself against the kitchen counter, taking deep breaths to calm his racing heart. The pie, that innocent-looking harbinger of truth, sat on the counter, its meringue peaks perfectly browned, waiting for its moment in the spotlight. "Everything okay in here?" Henry startled at the sound of Rachel's voice. She stood in the doorway, concern etched on her features. For a split second, he almost spilled every ounce of pain and betrayal right there in the kitchen. But the memory of that damning text message steeled his resolve. "Just making sure everything's perfect," he replied, forcing a smile. Rachel crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "It always is when you're in charge," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his cheek. The tenderness of the gesture felt like a knife twisting in Henry's gut. How could she act so loving, so normal, when she was harboring such a massive secret? The timer on the oven buzzed, saving Henry from having to respond. "That'll be the roast," he said, gently disentangling himself from Rachel's embrace. "Why don't you let everyone know dinner's ready?" As Rachel left to gather the family, Henry took one last steadying breath. It was time for the main event. The dining room quickly filled with hungry relatives, exclamations of delight rising as they took in the spread before them. Henry had outdone himself, a golden brown roast beef, perfectly crisp Yorkshire puddings, a rainbow of roasted vegetables, and boats of rich gravy. It was a feast fit for royalty, or in this case, for a Last Supper. Henry took his place at the head of the table, Rachel to his right, beaming with pride at her husband's culinary prowess. As the plates were passed and the wine poured, the room filled with the comfortable sounds of a family meal, the clink of cutlery, murmured appreciation, and snippets of conversation. Throughout the meal, Henry remained unusually quiet, responding to questions and compliments with tight smiles and brief answers. A few observant relatives exchanged concerned glances, but most were too engrossed in the food and conversation to notice the host's distraction. As the main course wound down and satisfied sighs echoed around the table, Henry knew his moment had arrived. He stood, gently tapping his wine glass with a spoon to call for attention. "Before we move on to dessert," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within, "I'd like to say a few words about family, about trust, and about the ties that bind us." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Henry. Rachel looked up at him, her expression a mix of surprise and admiration, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. Henry lifted his glass, a sardonic smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "To family," he said, his gaze sweeping across the gathered faces before finally landing on Rachel. "And to the secrets we keep from those we claim to love the most." The confusion in Rachel's eyes was the last thing Henry saw before he turned to retrieve the pie, the sweet, tart instrument of his long-awaited revelation. A hush fell over the dining room as Henry returned, the lemon meringue pie held before him like an offering. The golden peaks of meringue glistened under the warm light of the chandelier, belying the storm of emotions about to be unleashed. "You all know how much Rachel loves my lemon meringue pie," Henry began, his voice unnaturally calm. He set the dessert down at the center of the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the expectant silence. "It's been her favorite since our first date, but today, I've prepared it with some special ingredients." Rachel's brow furrowed in confusion, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "Henry, what are you talking about?" Ignoring her, Henry picked up the pie server, its silver surface reflecting the tense faces around the table. "You see, each component of this pie now holds a deeper meaning." He cut into the pie, the knife slicing through the delicate meringue with a soft crackle. "The crust," Henry continued, his voice taking on an edge, "represents the foundation of trust in a relationship. I always thought ours was solid, unshakable." He lifted the first slice onto a plate, the filling oozing slightly. "But as it turns out, it's more fragile than I realized." A murmur of unease rippled through the gathered family members. Aunt Mildred clutched her pearls, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Uncle Bob set down his wine glass, suddenly very attentive. Henry's eyes locked with Rachel's as he continued. "The filling, tart and acidic, represents the bitter truth that's been hidden beneath the sweet exterior of our marriage." He paused, watching as the color drained from Rachel's face. "Would you like to tell them, Rachel, or shall I?" Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke. "Henry, please, what's going on?" The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. All eyes darted between Henry and Rachel, the tension palpable. "I found your old phone the other day," Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the silent room. "You got a text. From Tom." He spat the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "He misses you. Can't wait to see you again. Sends his love." Gasps and shocked murmurs erupted around the table. Rachel's mother let out a small cry of distress, quickly muffled by her husband's comforting arm. Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Henry, I can explain dash." "Explain what, Rachel?" Henry's voice rose, the calm facade finally cracking. "Explain how you've been lying to me? How our entire marriage has been a sham." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. "It's not like that. Please, let me dash." But Henry was beyond listening. The dam had broken, and years of trust and love, now tainted by betrayal, came flooding out. "How long, Rachel? How long have you been seeing him? Was it just a fling? Or have you been laughing at me behind my back this whole time?" The gathered family members sat frozen, caught in the crossfire of this unexpected confrontation. Cousin Sarah unconsciously cradled her pregnant belly, as if to shield her unborn child from the emotional shrapnel flying through the room. Rachel's shoulders slumped in defeat. It was just once," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I made a mistake, Henry. Terrible, awful mistake. But I swear, it meant nothing." Henry laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "A mistake? Is that what we're calling it now?" He turned to address the stunned family. "You see, the meringue on top? It's like the sweetness Rachel's been using to cover up her lies. Beautiful on the surface, but hiding something sour underneath." Rachel's cousin Tim stood up, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "I think we should go," he said, glancing around at the other relatives. There were murmurs of agreement as chairs scraped back and people began to gather their things, eager to escape the unfolding drama. As the family filed out, casting awkward glances and whispered condolences, Henry remained standing at the head of the table, the half-served pie a silent witness to the destruction of his marriage. When the last guest had departed, leaving only the echo of the slamming front door, Rachel collapsed into her chair, sobs racking her body. "Henry, please," she pleaded between gasps. "It was a moment of weakness. I never meant to hurt you. I love you." Henry stared at her, the woman he'd loved for over 2 decades, now a stranger to him. The anger that had fueled him throughout the afternoon suddenly drained away, leaving him feeling hollow. "You know what the worst part is, Rachel?" he said softly, sinking into his own chair. "I still love you too, and that makes this betrayal hurt even more." Rachel reached out across the table, her hand trembling. "Then please, let's talk about this. We can work through it. We can fix this." Henry looked at her outstretched hand, then at the remnants of their family dinner, half-eaten food growing cold, wine glasses with lipstick stains, the lemon meringue pie sitting accusingly in the center of it all. "I don't know if we can," he whispered, more to himself than to Rachel. "Some things, once broken, can never be put back together the same way." As the gravity of the situation settled over them, Henry and Rachel sat in silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the painful seconds of their shattered reality. The sweet aroma of the lemon meringue pie, once a symbol of their love, now hung in the air like a bitter reminder of trust betrayed and a future uncertain. Outside, the sun began to set on Oakville, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. For the Callahans, it marked not just the end of a day, but potentially the end of a marriage, leaving them to face the daunting question of what comes after the truth has been served. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the dining room, casting long shadows across the ruins of their family gathering, Henry and Rachel sat in stunned silence. The air was thick with unspoken words and shattered dreams. The lemon meringue pie, now a cruel metaphor for their marriage, sat untouched at the center of the table. Suddenly, the oppressive quiet was shattered by a sound neither of them expected: laughter. Deep, mirthless laughter that bordered on hysteria. It took Henry a moment to realize the sound was coming from him. Rachel looked up, her tear-stained face a mask of confusion. "Henry?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Henry couldn't stop. The laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside him, years of pent-up emotions finding release in this inappropriate outburst. "I'm sorry," he managed between gasps. "It's just all of this. It's so absurd." As quickly as it had come, the laughter died away, leaving Henry feeling drained. He looked at Rachel, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. The woman he'd loved, built a life with, shared dreams with. She suddenly seemed like a stranger. "I need some air," Henry muttered, pushing back from the table. He stumbled towards the back door, leaving Rachel alone with the remnants of their shattered evening. The cool night air hit Henry like a slap to the face as he stepped onto the back porch. He gripped the railing, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to steady himself. The manicured backyard, scene of countless summer barbecues and lazy Sunday afternoons, now seemed alien and unwelcoming. A rustling sound from the bushes near the fence line caught Henry's attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Henry's blood ran cold as he recognized the intruder. "Mike!" he called out, disbelief coloring his voice. "What the hell are you doing hiding in my yard?" Henry's brother stepped fully into the porch light, his face a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I couldn't leave, Henry. Not after what happened in there." Henry's mind reeled. Had Mike been out here the whole time, eavesdropping on the aftermath of his revelation? "You should have gone home with the others," he said, his voice harsh. Mike took a tentative step closer. "I know, but there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." A cold dread settled in the pit of Henry's stomach. "What are you talking about?" Mike took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I knew, Henry, about Rachel and Tom. I've known for months. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Henry gripped the railing tighter, feeling as if he might float away if he let go. "You knew?" he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Mike nodded, unable to meet his brother's eyes. "I saw them together at that little cafe on Maple Street. It was clear they were more than friends. I should have told you then, but I didn't know how." Henry's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. All those times Mike had acted awkward around Rachel, the way he'd avoided family gatherings in recent months. It all made a horrible kind of sense now. "How could you keep this from me?" Henry's voice was barely audible, choked with hurt and betrayal. Mike finally looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I thought I was protecting you. I convinced myself that if I didn't say anything, maybe it would just go away. That Rachel would come to her senses and end it before you ever found out." Henry laughed bitterly. "Protect me? By letting me live a lie? By watching me make a fool of myself in front of our entire family? I'm sorry, Henry. I know I messed up. I should have told you the moment I found out." The back door creaked open behind them. Rachel stood in the doorway, her face pale in the porch light. "Henry? Who are you talking to?" Her eyes widened as she spotted Mike. "Oh God!" Henry turned to face his wife, feeling as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Did you know that Mike knew about your affair?" Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I swear, Henry, I had no idea." Mike stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "She's telling the truth, Henry. Rachel never knew I'd seen them." Henry looked between his wife and his brother, the two people he'd trusted most in the world, now revealed as the architects of his humiliation. The anger that had fueled him earlier was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "I can't do this," he said quietly. "I can't be here with either of you right now." Without another word, Henry brushed past Rachel and back into the house. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the front door and walked out into the night, leaving behind the shattered remains of his family, his marriage, and the life he thought he knew. As Henry's car roared to life and peeled out of the driveway, Rachel and Mike stood frozen on the porch, the weight of their secrets and mistakes hanging heavy between them. Inside, on the dining room table, the lemon meringue pie sat untouched, its perfect exterior now a mockery of the facade that had crumbled around it. In the quiet of the empty house, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoed like a countdown, marking the seconds of an uncertain future for the Callahan family. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel flickered weakly in the pre-dawn darkness, casting an eerie blue glow over Henry's face as he sat motionless in his parked car. He'd been driving aimlessly for hours, the events of the evening playing on an endless loop in his mind. Now, exhausted and emotionally drained, he found himself in this seedy parking lot on the outskirts of Oakville. With a heavy sigh, Henry dragged himself from the car and checked into a room, ignoring the suspicious glance from the night clerk. The room was small and musty, a far cry from the comfortable home he'd left behind, but it would do for now. As the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the threadbare curtains, Henry lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. His phone, silent all night, suddenly buzzed to life. A flood of missed calls and messages from Rachel, Mike, and various concerned relatives lit up the screen. Henry turned the phone off and tossed it aside. Days passed in a haze of room service meals and mindless daytime TV. Henry barely left the room, his beard growing unkempt, his chef's hands idle for the first time in years. On the fourth day, a gentle knock at the door roused him from his stupor. "Mr. Callahan?" a hesitant voice called. "It's Maria from the restaurant. May I come in?" Henry considered ignoring her, but something in Maria's tone compelled him to open the door. His sous chef stood there, concern etched on her face, holding a brown paper bag. "Chef, Maria faltered, taking in Henry's disheveled appearance. "We've been worried. You haven't been answering calls and, well, I brought you some food. Real food." she added with a small smile, holding up the bag. Henry stepped aside, wordlessly inviting her in. As Maria busied herself unpacking containers of homemade soup and freshly baked bread, Henry felt a twinge of something he hadn't experienced in days' hunger. They ate in silence, the familiar flavors of his own restaurant's cuisine stirring memories Henry had been trying to suppress. Finally, Maria spoke. "Chef, I don't know what happened, and it's not my place to ask, but the restaurant needs you. Your staff, we're like family, and we're lost without you." Family. The word hit Henry like a physical blow. Family, he repeated bitterly. What does that even mean anymore? Maria reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Henry's arm. It means people who care about you, who stand by you even when things get tough, maybe especially then. Her words hung in the air, forcing Henry to confront the thoughts he'd been avoiding. Yes, Rachel had betrayed him. Yes, Mike had kept a devastating secret. But hadn't there been years of love, of shared joys and sorrows, before this? As Maria left, promising to keep his whereabouts secret for now, Henry found himself at a crossroads. The anger that had sustained him was fading, leaving behind a profound sadness, and underneath, a flicker of something else. Hope? Forgiveness? He wasn't sure. That night, for the first time since the disastrous family dinner, Henry dreamed. He was back in his kitchen at home, preparing a lemon meringue pie. But this time, as he cracked the eggs and zested the lemons, he felt no bitterness, only a bittersweet nostalgia for simpler times. Henry woke with a start, the dream still vivid in his mind. He glanced at the clock, 3:27 a.m. Without fully understanding why, he got dressed and drove back home. The house was dark and quiet as Henry let himself in. He made his way to the kitchen, flipping on the lights and gathering ingredients. As the first birds began to chirp outside, heralding the approaching dawn, Henry lost himself in the familiar rhythms of baking. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when Rachel, drawn by the smell of baking, appeared in the doorway. She looked as exhausted as Henry felt, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Henry?" she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "You're home." Henry turned, a freshly baked lemon meringue pie in his hands. "We need to talk," he said softly. "Really talk. About everything." Rachel nodded, tears welling in her eyes. As they sat at the kitchen table, the pie between them like a peace offering, Henry realized that this moment, this choice to stay, to try and understand, to possibly forgive, was perhaps the bravest thing he'd ever done. The pie remained untouched as words began to flow, painful truths, long-buried resentments, and tentative hopes for the future. Outside, Oakville was waking up, unaware that in one kitchen, two people were taking the first difficult steps towards rebuilding what had been broken. As Henry listened to Rachel's tearful explanations and offered his own painful admissions, he understood that forgiveness wasn't a destination, but a journey. And while he didn't know where this path would lead, he knew he had to walk it for Rachel, for himself, and for the love they had once shared and might, with work and time, share again. The lemon meringue pie, once a symbol of betrayal, now sat between them as a testament to the possibility of redemption, its sweet tart aroma filling the kitchen with the promise of a new day. The gentle hum of conversation filled the Callahan home once again as family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. It had been 3 weeks since the disastrous reunion, and Henry and Rachel had decided it was time to face their relatives and attempt to mend the rifts that had formed. Henry stood in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a fresh lemon meringue pie. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the difficult conversations and soul-searching of the past weeks. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her face etched with nervous anticipation. "Everyone's here," she said softly. "Are you ready?" Henry nodded, picking up the pie. "As ready as I'll ever be." They entered the living room together, presenting a united front despite the lingering tension between them. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the couple. Aunt Mildred was the first to speak, her voice quavering slightly. Henry, dear, Rachel, we're so glad you called us all here. We've been so worried. Henry cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. Thank you all for coming, he began. Rachel and we have a lot to say and even more to apologize for. He set the pie down on the coffee table, a symbolic gesture not lost on those present. First, I want to apologize for how I handled things at our last gathering. It wasn't fair to any of you to be put in that position. Rachel stepped forward, her hand hovering near Henry's but not quite touching. And I need to apologize for my actions. Not just to Henry but to all of you. I betrayed not just my husband, but our entire family. A heavy silence hung in the air as the weight of their words settled over the room. Henry's brother Mike shifted uncomfortably in his seat, guilt written across his features. Henry took a deep breath before continuing. We've spent the last few weeks really talking for the first time in years. It hasn't been easy, and we still have a long way to go, but we're committed to working through this. Rachel nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. We've realized that what happened, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about years of unspoken resentments, of taking each other for granted, of losing sight of why we fell in love in the first place. A murmur of understanding rippled through the gathered family members. Cousin Sarah, her baby now a month old, spoke up. We're here for you both, whatever you need. Henry managed a small smile. Thank you. That means more than you know. He reached for the pie server, his hand trembling slightly. Now, I thought we could all share this pie together. A symbol of a fresh start. As Henry began to cut into the pie, Rachel suddenly gasped. Wait! She cried out, her face pale with shock. All eyes turned to her as she stumbled back, her hand over her mouth. Oh God, Henry, I have to tell you something. Something terrible. The room fell deathly silent as Rachel's shoulders began to shake with sobs. That night, after everyone left, I was so ashamed, so desperate. I poisoned the first pie. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Henry's hand froze, the pie server hovering inches above the fresh pie's surface. Rachel's words tumbled out in a rush. I was going to end it all for both of us. But then you left and I couldn't go through with it. I threw the pie away, but I never told you. The shock on Henry's face mirrored that of everyone in the room. The pie server clattered to the floor, the sound deafening in the stunned silence. You were going to kill us? Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. Rachel nodded, her face a mask of anguish. I wasn't thinking clearly. The shame, the guilt, it was too much. I thought it would be easier if we both just... She couldn't finish the sentence, collapsing into tears. The room erupted into chaos. Aunt Mildred fainted. Uncle Bob caught between trying to revive her and yelling at Rachel. Cousin Sarah clutched her baby protectively to her chest, while her husband ushered her towards the door. Through it all, Henry stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had been trying to forgive, the woman who, in her darkest moment, had contemplated ending both their lives. As family members argued and cried around them, Henry finally moved. But instead of backing away from Rachel, he took a step towards her. Then another, and another. Rachel looked up, her tear-streaked face a picture of confusion and fear. Henry? She whispered. Henry reached out, his hand shaking, and gently touched Rachel's cheek. Oh, Rachel, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What have we done to each other? In that moment, surrounded by the chaos of their family's reaction, Henry realized that the path to true forgiveness and healing would be far longer and more difficult than he had imagined. But as he looked into Rachel's eyes, seeing the depths of her pain and remorse, he also knew that it was a path they would have to walk together. The lemon meringue pie sat forgotten on the table, no longer a symbol of betrayal or reconciliation, but a stark reminder of how close they had come to losing everything and how much work lay ahead if they hoped to truly save their marriage. As the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the Callahan home, Henry and Rachel stood together in the eye of the storm they had created. facing an uncertain future with the knowledge that their hardest challenges, and perhaps their greatest chance at redemption, still lay ahead. As the chaos in the living room reached a fever pitch, Henry's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of Rachel's confession. The sounds of their family's shock and outrage faded into a dull roar as he focused solely on the woman before him, her face a mask of anguish and regret. "Everyone, please." Henry's voice cut through the noise, surprisingly steady. "I need you all to leave. Now." Protests erupted, but Henry held up his hand, his expression brooking no argument. "Please, Rachel and we need to talk. Alone." Reluctantly, the family began to file out, casting worried and angry glances at the couple. Mike was the last to leave, hesitating at the door. "Henry, are you sure?" Henry nodded, his eyes never leaving Rachel. "I'm sure. Go home, Mike." As the front door closed behind Mike, an oppressive silence fell over the house. Rachel stood trembling, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Henry moved slowly, deliberately, to the couch and sat down. After a moment, he patted the seat beside him. "Sit down, Rachel. Let's talk." Rachel approached cautiously, perching on the edge of the couch as if ready to flee at any moment. "Henry, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly." Shoo!" Henry interrupted gently. "I need you to listen right now, okay?" Rachel nodded, biting her lip to hold back fresh tears. Henry took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "What you did, what you planned to do, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. It's terrifying and heartbreaking and I don't know if I can ever fully understand it." Rachel flinched at his words, but Henry continued. "But I think I understand the pain that drove you to that point. The shame, the guilt, the feeling that there was no way out." He reached out slowly, taking Rachel's hand in his. She stared at their joined hands in disbelief. "I'm not saying I forgive you. Not yet. What you did, the affair, the lie, and yes, even the poison pie, it's going to take a long time to work through. But Rachel, I want you to understand something." Henry's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "Despite everything, I still love you, and I think that means we have to try, to heal, to understand, to find a way forward together." Rachel's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You still want to try? After everything I've done?" Henry nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. We'll need help, professional help. There will be days when it feels impossible. But yes, I want to try." Rachel broke down then, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in heaving sobs. Henry hesitated for just a moment before pulling her into his arms, his own tears falling silently. They sat like that for what felt like hours, the untouched lemon meringue pie on the coffee table bearing silent witness to this fragile new beginning. As the last light of day faded from the windows, Henry gently disentangled himself from Rachel. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go to the kitchen." Rachel followed, confused but willing. In the kitchen, Henry began to gather ingredients: flour, sugar, lemons. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Henry managed a small, sad smile. "We're going to make a new pie, together, from scratch." As they worked side by side, measuring and mixing, a tentative calm settled over them. The familiar rhythms of baking, once a source of joy in their marriage, now became a kind of therapy. While the pie baked, filling the kitchen with its citrusy aroma, Henry and Rachel sat at the table, hands clasped. "Where do we go from here?" Rachel asked quietly. Henry squeezed her hand gently. "One day at a time. We'll find a therapist. We'll talk, really talk. And we'll work on rebuilding trust, bit by bit." The timer dinged, and Henry rose to retrieve the pie. As he set it on the cooling rack, he turned to Rachel. "It won't be easy. There will be days when the pain feels too much to bear. But if we're both willing to put in the work, to be honest with each other and ourselves, maybe we can create something new, something stronger." Rachel nodded, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. I want that, more than anything. As the scent of freshly baked pie filled the kitchen, Henry and Rachel stood side by side, looking at their creation. It wasn't perfect. The crust was a little uneven, the filling slightly too tart. But it was theirs, made together in a moment of new understanding. Henry cut 2 small slices, handing one to Rachel. They ate in silence, the flavors bittersweet on their tongues. Outside, the first stars of evening began to appear in the darkening sky. In the Callahan kitchen, 2 people who had hurt each other deeply took the first tentative steps on a long journey of healing, armed with nothing but love, hope, and a freshly baked lemon meringue pie. As they finished their slices, Henry looked at Rachel, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we start again." Rachel nodded, reaching for Henry's hand. "Together," she whispered, and in that moment, with the taste of lemon and sugar lingering on their lips, they both allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.